Hey everybody, just chiming in again as we are counting down the days to your IB exams. It looks like we are a little bit over a week away, and I wanted to share with my students that have been absent the last couple of days and with anybody else who might be watching some insight into the IB rubric. Now, I'm a grader for the IB. I've been doing it for a number of years, reading paper 2 and paper 3, but mostly paper 2. The rubrics are identical for them, so you really don't have to freak out about learning two different rubrics here. What we are going to do really quickly today is just run through the things you need to be thinking about as you write your papers, as you structure your essays. And I'm looking at right here. I'm going to live in the 10 to 12 mark band. If you are a student that is hitting a 10 to 12 on each of your two paper twos, and if you're fortunate, you get three paper threes that you just love, and you can get to that 10 to 12 zone on three paper threes, you are well on your way to the highest marks on your IB exam. 13 to 15 is awesome, but I'm going to let you know that those papers are rare. I don't know an exact percentage of how much we see, but I got to tell you, they don't pop up too often. Those are the papers that when I'm reading them, I'm like, whoa, this is the kind of paper that I wouldn't be writing myself. It goes beyond even my knowledge. I tend to think a lot of our 13 to 15 papers are the ones that not only combine excellent writing and understanding of the rubric, but also like an encyclopedic knowledge of the topic that they're writing about. I wonder if these kids are often the ones that get lucky and find a paper 2 or a paper 3 that lines up with their EE or their IA. So I want to live in the 10 to 12 zone, and if we bump up here to 13 to 15 a little bit, we're good to go. So this is how the IB graders actually grade your papers. We take the rubric that many of you have seen, and it gets broken down into four main components, each with a different mark band. We're looking at the focus of your paper and the structure. We're looking at the knowledge that you demonstrate and the context, the historical context that you understand. We're hoping that you choose appropriate examples for the question and you make links between them. And then there should be adequate analysis. You should acknowledge perspectives, and you should actually have a consistent conclusion, a response to your paper. So let's run through each one of these really quickly. For focus and structure, you guys have to write an essay. I want to remind you that it does not cost you a penny or anything to use paragraphs and use proper structure for your paper. So you want to organize your paper in such a way that there is a sensible flow and organization to your paper that makes sense. You start with an introduction to your topic. You maybe explain any key terms in your introduction so the reader knows that you know what you're talking about. And then you offer a thesis that works to an answer to the question. And then you work through your arguments within your body paragraphs. And then you ultimately come up and conclude the paper. So you should have a well-organized paper. There shouldn't be a lot of repetition in your paper. We avoid repetition in our writing by planning our writing. You should all take about 5 to 10 minutes before you actually start writing your paper 2s or paper 3s. Organizing, planning, outlining. You should know what you're going to write before you write it. Now, if you come up with another idea as you're writing your paper, you can always add another paragraph at the end and put it, draw an arrow so the reader can know where you really wanted it to go. That's fine. But most of your organization and your thought process should happen before you start writing. Also, really important here is we got to understand the demands of the question. That's what I tell my students to answer the full question. If there's two parts, answer both parts. If a question were something like discuss the importance of territorial changes after a war. That's great. You've got to discuss what the territorial changes are, but it shouldn't just be a laundry list of territorial changes. We should also evaluate the importance of them compared to maybe other important aspects of the outcomes of wars. If we're talking about two leaders and their role in the development of Cold War tensions, we should certainly have historical knowledge that addresses what they did during the Cold War, but we should also be focusing on what the question's asking. How do they contribute to the development of Cold War tensions? Not just a laundry list of what they do. If we've got a question about technology in war, like to what extent do technology or technological advances contribute to victory in war, or contribute to the outcome of a war? That's great if you've got a laundry list of knowledge about those technologies, but if you're not actually answering the question, then it's doing no good for you. So make sure the demands of the question are understood and addressed. Make sure you organize your paper well. And if you do those two things, you're going to get to the 10 to 12 mark band easy. You need to have world history knowledge. You need to know your stuff. This is what you've been doing for the last 2 years. So you've got to have historical knowledge within your paper. It doesn't mean you have to know everything. It doesn't mean everything has to be perfect. But you should have ample historical knowledge in your paper. I tell my students that more is more. You've got 45 minutes to write 2 papers for paper 2. If you're doing paper 3, you've got about 50 minutes for each of your papers. That should be enough time to write ample historical evidence within your paper. And it should be accurate and relevant. But notice this word mostly. It still doesn't have to be perfect. If you have an error, you'll survive, as long as your history is mostly accurate. And we should understand the historical context and the historical processes that have developed. And that's going to get you the 10 to 12 mark band for that section. When we're looking at examples and links and comparisons, you've got to make sure that you pay attention to what the question's asking. If it asks you for wars in 2 regions, give them wars in 2 regions. If it asks you leaders in 2 regions, you give them leaders in 2 regions. Make sure your examples are appropriate to the question being asked. And then this is what a lot of students lose out on. The response makes effective links or comparisons. If you don't make links between whatever 2 leaders or 2 wars you're talking about, you could drop all the way down to the 4 to 6 mark band on this particular question. And so you want to make links. You don't just give me 1 mini paper on what Truman does and 1 mini paper on what Stalin does. We need to make links. Both of them did this. Both of them experienced that. One did this while the other did that. Finally, for the last, analysis, perspectives, and conclusion. There's 3 things you got to do here. You need to have critical analysis, which is mostly clear and coherent. This is like the explanation of history. It's not just what happened in history, but it's often like the why of history. You should be offering explanations for the why of history. You know, if you're talking about something like mistrust between the Soviet Union and the United States, between Joseph Stalin and his Western counterparts, you might talk about how he was frustrated or mistrusted them because of their handling of the opening of a Western front. In his mind, it was very much delayed. Well, your analysis would be your explanation for why the United States and Britain waited until June of 1944 for that invasion. So you should have that analysis, not just at 1 or 2 points in your paper, but really built in throughout your paper. You need to have an awareness of and an evaluation of different perspectives. Here's where so many students either don't attempt it, which drops you all the way down to the 7 to 9 zone, it drops you all the way down to the 4 to 6 zone, or your attempt at it doesn't include an evaluation of another perspective. So what we're looking for here, this is what you might have heard of in your class to be historiography, but a lot of students are missing the mark here. You are not just bringing up another historian's opinion or another school of thought. You are using those ideas to either support your thesis, or if they do challenge your thesis, you can acknowledge them, you bring them up, but then you've got the evaluation. You let us know why that doesn't ultimately change your opinion. What you don't want to do is build up a castle of good arguments and then knock your work down by some other historian's arguments. So you have to have what we would say is a consistent conclusion. The reader, by the end of your paper, should absolutely know what your answer to the question is. That's what we care about the most, that you have an answer to your question. So if you know a couple schools of thought or a couple historians that you're going to work into your paper, great, but make sure they support your argument. Or if they don't support your argument, make sure you acknowledge them, you're aware of them, but you offer some refutation, some reason why it's not enough to outweigh whatever argument you are making. That would be the consistent conclusion. If you do those four things, you're going to be in that 10 to 12 mark band. And if a student is right in the middle there, if he gets two 11s, a 22 out of 30 on paper 2 gets you into that 7 zone. So you are good to go for IB history. So while it would be lovely to get to the 13 to 15 zone, and that should be everybody's goal, I think the 10 to 12 is absolutely reasonable. If we understand and answer the question that's being asked, if we demonstrate and we have a good organization, if we understand some world history and we work it into our paper while offering analysis, some explanation of that history, if we choose appropriate examples and we provide effective links between those examples, and you have that awareness that another perspective exists and you offer an evaluation of it, like is that a good argument, or why isn't that argument stronger than whatever argument you are making, and that is that. Come to a consistent conclusion, be organized throughout your paper, and I think you are on your way to success on your IB exam. So good luck. Stay tuned for more, and we'll see you in about a week and a half, and I'll hopefully be grading your paper in about a month and a half, or a month or so. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.